Welcome back, everyone. It has been a long time since my last upload, and I could give many excuses for that, but instead, we're just going to jump right into Game 6 of the North American Open. Now, I'm on 3 points out of 5 right now. I just won 2 in a row, so if I can keep that going against a high-rated player in this round, then that sets me up to gain a lot of points from this tournament, potentially. So I got the black pieces here, and my opponent plays e4, I play c5, and we get knight c3, which is the closed Sicilian. So now g3, g6, we both just develop our pieces, and in this opening, my idea is just to get this set up with knight e7 and castles, but after this, I don't actually have a concrete plan. I just make some basic improving moves for my pieces, and this is okay until a certain point, but now after e5, I don't actually have a concrete plan, so I just play knight to f5, attacking the bishop, and these moves are all book moves, but I didn't know that they were book moves, and because of that, I was spending a lot of time on them while my opponent was moving basically instantly. I don't think my opponent lost a single second off of his clock because of the increment at this, or because of the delay. So that's very tough psychologically because when your opponent plays instantly, your opponent's obviously very well prepared. If they're more prepared than you, then you're basically playing the computer, and you never want to be doing that. If you play the computer, you cannot win because computers are just too good. You want to play a new game where both sides have to think for themselves. So this is why you should be prepared, and instead you should be prepared, learn theory, and don't be like me and not know any theory. But I'll get better. I'll get better theory. Trust. So I play knight takes f3, and this is where I probably should have thought for more time because if I played this move bishop to d7, then black would basically have no problems at all. If I played bishop d7, then if my opponent takes, then I just take back, attacking the knight. And the whole idea of bishop to d7 is to challenge this diagonal on this light squared long diagonal. So if my opponent plays like knight to e4 now it's okay to take this pawn because the c5 pawn is no longer hanging on c5 here. And if my opponent plays like knight to e4, I just play bishop to c6 after takes and takes. Um, if everything gets traded, then black is just completely fine here because black has a good bishop and also open files here, and just no weaknesses. But instead, I play knight takes f3, which is still okay, but now I'm just playing moves and hoping that they're good. And that's very, very dangerous because maybe it works to a certain point, but eventually you are going to make a blunder if you don't know what you're doing. So queen to d1, pawn takes e5, these are still okay, and after bishop takes e5, we get knight to e4, attacking this pawn. And here I'm supposed to play b6, but the reason I didn't do that is because after knight to f6, I lose an exchange. But this is actually okay for me because after bishop d7 or e5, since I have a good knight in the center and I have a really stable pawn structure, black's just okay here because I also have a pawn for the exchange. However, I played rook to b8, stepping out of the diagonal, but this is already too slow because my opponent can now gets the initiative and plays c3, attacking my knight. Now my knight doesn't have very many great squares. If I go to a4, then I lose this pawn, and then I lose another pawn after a4. After knight to c7, I lose another pawn. That's not good. And if I go knight to c6, then after knight takes c5, I can no longer play b6 because the knight on c6 is hanging from the bishop. So I play knight to f5. Now after bishop takes c5, rook to e. I could have played rook to e8, but I didn't like that after d4 or something. There were some possibilities. Obviously there's knight to e3 here, but there were some possibilities of knight to d6 and forcing a discovered attack. So instead, and if I play knight to d6, then there's pawn to d4, kicking my bishop from the knight. So that's also not okay. So instead I played bishop d6, just accepting that he was probably going to take, and then get the two bishops, which is really, really strong. He can take this pawn, and a7, move the bishop back, and just be up a pawn, and I'll just try to see what happens and see if I can generate any counterplay down a pawn. But instead I completely missed that my opponent can basically win the game immediately on the spot. So try to pause the video and see if you can find white's winning move here. So if you saw the move rook takes f5, sacrificing the rook, congratulations. This is a great tactical find because it wins basically two pieces for a rook, but also it also wins more than that. So in the game I had in the game I took on f5 with the pawn, and after bishop takes d6, it looks like white has two pieces for the rook, but after white takes, this is also a fork. So I take the knight, and then white takes my rook, now I take this pawn, and now I'm down a piece. However, I do have a pawn for the piece, and this pawn is very passed. And since I have a passed pawn, I do have some chances for a counterplay with like rook to e8, rook to e2, and try to queen this pawn. And I couldn't take this bishop because the rook can just escape the attack and recapture at the same time, and I would just be down a clean piece. So instead, I'm down a piece, but at least I have this pawn here. So let's just see what happens. Obviously, I didn't have too many chances here. The only reason I was playing on is just to see how my opponent converts this game, because there are things to learn from that. When you're up a piece, then like when you're down a piece and you don't. So if you're down a piece and you don't resign against a higher rated player, then you can see how they convert that game. So then when you're up a piece against another player, then you less likely to throw that game. If that, yeah, I think that makes sense. So queen to d2, blocking this pawn. What's going on? Okay, so queen to d2, blockading the pawn, and I bring the rook to the open file. And now bishop to f3 stops that, so my opponent's being very prophylactic, which is good because he's up a piece. He can afford to make some defensive moves, and once he's consolidated, then he can use his piece advantage to start dealing some damage. So I play queen to b6 check, we get a block. Now rook to e3, interposing this attack, and I'm also turning to take this bishop at this point. So my opponent plays king to g2, stepping out of the pin, and also preparing a very nasty tactic. So I played g5 with the idea of playing g4 and kicking the bishop away so that I can play maybe rook to e2. And there was also a line I saw somehow where I could maybe get like a bishop to g4, trade queens, and then sacrifice this rook. And after that, play d2, and I could queen this pawn for the rook. And then the opposite colored bishop endgame would be a draw, but that was very, very far-fetched. But I just thought that g5 would create some chances for potentially some swindles. However, this just allows my opponent to find just for my opponent to play for my opponent to play a very, very strong move to basically just simplify the game, and there's no more complications. So let's pause the video again and see if we can find that move. Okay, so if you found this move bishop takes a7, congratulations. You didn't forget about this bishop on b8, but I did, and I didn't see this move at all. And the reason it's so good is because it unprotects the queen. So right now this queen is protected by this pawn, so rook to e8 doesn't really work. I can just take the rook. But after bishop takes a7, now after the queen takes on a7, it's no longer protected. So rook e1 takes advantage of this pin, and white basically wins the rook. Now I play rook takes e1, and I play out a few more moves because I have this move g4, and it gets a little bit, maybe a little tricky if my opponent is careless and like takes this pawn or something. Then I'm actually winning now because, well, actually I'm not winning. Well, if I can play d2. I'm just starting to play push d2 and make a new queen. So my opponent has to be very, very careful, and he plays king to f2, attacking the rook. So now I can't take because he can take the rook. And now I see this move d2, but after bishop to e2, making a queen, and I can get this endgame where my opponent has a queen and a huge queenside majority for a rook and a bishop. But I didn't think that this would be holdable. I think I would probably still lose this game. So instead, I tried to be more desperate with rook to b1, and the idea is if my opponent plays like bishop to e2, I can take this pawn, and after queen to b8, I can play takes, and then I can maybe try to take and then push this pawn or something. But instead, my opponent just plays queen to g4 check, and then queen to d4, getting behind this pawn, and now I just have nothing left to do. So I can't push this pawn, I can't take, because then he just stops my pawn, and he just has a queen, and I don't. So unfortunately, I lose round 6. My opponent played very, very well, very smooth game. Basically, I basically cheesed like 10 plus moves of book, and then I fell apart after that. So that's very, very unfortunate, but at least now in this line, I'm gonna know to play. I know to play Bishop D7 instead of Knight takes F3, and I won't make this mistake again. So now I have 3 out of 6, and I have one more round left. So if I can play well in the last round and win that round, then maybe I won't lose too much rating points in this tournament. Okay, so then after that video, which should be out tomorrow, this Saturday I'm going to be playing in the Idaho Closed State Championship game. It's already been a year since the last one, and I am actually the defending champion, so hopefully that doesn't go horribly wrong and I don't end up embarrassing myself. But I'm going to make recaps on those as well, and we're going to get some new, fresh content. So I'll see you in those videos. Thank you so much for watching. Bye, everyone.